那么今天的讲座主题呢是针对于 Common App Personal Statement。这个讲座呢，首先要讲一下一篇优秀的大学申请主作文有什么特点。因为优秀的作文都是有一些共性，比如说能够展示学生高中期间的成长过程。比如说，一个同学过去很害羞、很安静，他怎么样突破这个局限，然后怎么样为某一个，比如说他所热爱的事业，然后成为一个这个机构的代言人等等，就是展示学生这个成长的过程。而且，一般优秀的文章呢，都展示学生比较谦卑的一面，而不是夸夸其谈的展示自己所有的这个成就。第二部分呢，Michael老师要剖析一下，学生在写大学主作文的时候有什么误区。比如说，有的同学可能像写简历一样写作文，这个就是写作的误区。第三部分呢，Michael老师要详细讲一下如何辅导学生呢撰写出一篇凸显学生个性的特点。因为 personal statement 就是要告诉大学招生办你到底是谁。我们再用30秒钟的时间稍微介绍一下不同的大学申请表，有大家最熟悉的、使用学校最多的 Common App 这个大学申请表。这个申请表呢，所有的学生都要写一篇 personal statement， 这是一篇主作文，650字。然后每一所大学呢都有自己的辅助的作文，比如说斯坦福有8篇的辅助作文。今天如果有额外的时间呢，我们也可以谈论一下斯坦福的8篇辅助作文。然后第二类申请表呢是 Coalition App， 很多大学同时使用 Common App 和 Coalition App 这个申请表。Coalition App 最大的特点呢是学生从9年级的时候就可以上传自己的一些资料，不论是参加机器人竞赛 First Robotics 的这个录像，还是你 Scholastic 作文竞赛的这个作品，都可以上传。有的大学呢只用 Coalition App， 一个典型的例子呢就是华盛顿大学西雅图分校。然后第三个最常见的申请表呢是加州大学的申请表 UC， 有4篇作文，其中有一篇最著名的作文就是你怎么样超越困难，然后 So what， 这个是比较迎合 UC 的校园文化，因为 UC 本身资源有，但是需要学生自己去争取，所以他们就希望从这个作文里边看出学生有没有这样的这个特性。那么什么时候写 Common App 这个主作文呢 ？Personal Statement， 我们认为6月、7月是一个黄金的阶段，因为学生早申截止日期是10月底，但是也有很多的学生提前提交大学申请表。所以说，如果学生能在6月、7月完成 Personal Statement 这篇主作文，那么8月份呢，学生就可以做很多的辅助作文。12年级开学之后，学生还有很多的课程要完成，而且还有各种各样的面试。所以现在呢是黄金时期。再稍微让大家看一下今年 Common App 的作文的命题。学生呢可以从中选出一个命题来写，但是不管学生选哪一个命题，优秀的作文具有同样的特点，就是你要告诉大学我到底是谁。因为大学审阅学生申请表的时间其实非常短，比如说 UC 审阅一份申请表，包含申请表的方方面面，从成绩单到课外活动到4篇作文，总共的时间是5分钟。那么私立学校呢稍微有点长，比如说西北大学，它可能是7分钟。所以说学生的这个作文部分呢，必须是以最简洁、最有力度的方式呈现出学生的特质。最后一个slide， 接下来 Michael 老师就要开始剖析 Common App 大作文。这个呢就是暑假集训班的一个大致日程。Common App 大作文一共包含10个小时的 Zoom 会议。第一天 会议就要和学生讨论一下他们的活动，然后挖掘学生的亮点。然后第2天的会议呢，就要辅导学生撰写出一个作文的框架。第2天、第3天就要开始作文的第1段。在整个写作的过程中呢，每一个段落的过程中呢，Michael 老师都会斟酌学生的每一句话，哎，这句话的内容可不可行？如果可行的话，怎么样延伸？所以说，在5次 Zoom 会议之后呢，学生都有一个作文的初稿，然后学生通过 Google Doc 呢分享这个段落和初稿。之后的6到17天呢 ，Michael 老师会对这个作文做精改。比如说，有的同学的作文写的不是很流畅，那怎么样把它写得很流畅？然后有的同学可能作文写的比较繁琐，那怎么样把这个语言变得更有力度？然后有的同学可能这个立意比较平淡，怎么样把这个立意提升？所以 Michael 老师在精改的时候就会做很大的调整。那么接下来呢，我们就请 Michael 老师做一下剖析。Michael 老师呢是英文讲座，因为有的家长呢需要中文翻译，所以在 Michael 老师回答每个问题之后，我会做一个非常简短的翻译。Okay, so Michael, when you answer every question, maybe I'll just do a very quick translation for some of the parents.
Okay, sure. So do you want me to answer the first question first, and then I'll wait for you to do a translation, and then we move to the second? Okay.
Yeah. So 第一个问题是，一个非常成功出彩的 Common App 大作文具有什么特点？ Yeah, so feel free to answer the first question, Michael.
Okay. So great personal statement is one that that makes clear how a student has changed over time, especially over their high school years, and become the person that they are at the moment. And so one way that I start trying to explain what a great personal statement is sort of by way of contrast, and to first explain what are some of the pitfalls that students sometimes might stumble into when trying to attack the personal statement. So one of the major mistakes you can make is to think of the personal statement as a chance to talk about achievements or to brag about awards or something like that. That's really not what the personal statement is for. That's what your resume is for. You can list all those things on a resume. Your personal statement is really a chance for you to explain to colleges who you uniquely are. What is your personality? What are your interests, your curiosities? What are the hobbies or the intellectual interests that keep you up at night? What are aspects of your personality that you're working on and continue to work on? So I think a great personal statement is one that focuses more on personality than on achievement. And that's probably the biggest general piece of advice that I would give is that one of focus on expressing who you are instead of bragging about what you've done.
我做一个很快的翻译。这个大学申请的大作文呢，是等于是学生的一个软件，因为大学在申请表上可以看到学生的成绩，可以看到学生的标化成绩。那学生到底是谁？学生的兴趣是什么？爱好是什么？学术兴趣是什么？个性是什么？都要通过 personal statement 来反映出来。一个误区是学生列出自己所有的高中期间的成就，这个成就是简历部分，学生可以放在课外活动、大学申请表的课外活动部分，不是 personal statement 所需要的内容。Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. So do you want me to take the second one then? What are the common mistakes and pitfalls?
Sure, yeah. 第2个问题是，那么大学申请表的一些常见误区是什么？
Okay, so the biggest one I think is the one that I mentioned in answering the first question, which is talking about your achievements or just bragging about your achievements, thinking that you need to state every award you've ever won, for example. Though that's a big mistake. Another mistake that I see, or a pitfall in the personal statement, is writing a statement that's more about an idea you have or an argument you have, and that's less about who you are and how you've developed and what are the formative experiences in your life. So a successful personal statement should always be about some formative set of experiences in your life. You obviously can't cover every aspect of your personality and every big experience that's made you who you are, but a personal statement should be about who you are, and it should mention specific experiences from your life. Statements that where you run into trouble are often statements where, let's say a person has a really strong opinion or belief or argument that's a big part of why they want to go to college. That's fine, and your personal essay can maybe touch on some of the ideas that you think about, but a personal essay is not ultimately an argumentative essay about something. It's ultimately a personal statement, right? It's right in there in the title of it. It's personal. It's about revealing who you are and what kind of work you have done on yourself over the course of the last 4 years to change from who you were maybe coming into high school to who you are now. So that's another big mistake, is making it too much about ideas, which are impersonal at the end of the day. Ideas are often based on logic, but they're not a story of who somebody really is. So that's another mistake. And maybe the final mistake I'll talk about is a lot of people think that what you're expected to do in a personal statement is talk about challenges you've overcome, or something like that. That like the personal statement is about talking about issues you had or problems or challenges. It doesn't necessarily really have to be that. It should just be a story where you touch on certain meaningful experiences that have made you who you are today. So it's not a contest to see, who faced the most adversity, for example. It's more just about, well, what really matters to you.
Common App 最大的问题，通过这些年的审阅，我也发现学生基本上就是列出和简历相同的内容，或者呢，学生在做这个作文的时候，就是炫耀性比较强吧。因为一篇好的这个作文要显出学生成长的过程，这个怎么样，学生比如说从过去一个什么样的人，有一个反差，成长到下一步的人。这个就是一个大致的一个翻译。So Michael, feel free to go to the next one. Like, what are some of the most effective strategies for writing a successful personal statement? 接下来，麦克老师就谈一下，怎么样才能辅导学生写出一个成功的 personal statement.
Yeah. So I'll talk about how I like to approach the process of writing a personal statement. So for me, it's really important to have a strong outline. So in the sessions that I conduct, I do a lot of brainstorming and outlining in the initial 2 days. And then I think from there, it's easier to execute the statement once you kind of have the structure in place. So for me, the structure that I really like to use, or that I advocate that students use, is to have a first paragraph where it's written in scene. So you've got to imagine the people who work in college admissions offices reading thousands of these application essays over the course of years, right? Tens of thousands over the course of years if they work there for a long time. And if you can start with a vivid, compelling scene that draws somebody into the essay, I think that's really effective. So I always advocate that students write their first paragraph in scene, and I, explain what I mean by that more in the actual, group sessions, because it's harder actually than you think maybe to write something in scene, and then afterwards, you kind of zoom out to paragraph 2, where you explain what was going on in the first scene, and then throughout the essay, you develop who you were versus who you are. So you take the reader through how you got maybe to that point in time. Let's say in the past, I've seen people write their first scene about maybe culminating performance at a drama performance or mock trial or something like that. And so you might start with that kind of that first scene that's actually like the culmination of a lot of hard work. And so you start with that scene and then you kind of go back in time and you say, starting in, ninth grade, I couldn't have imagined ever being on stage in front of hundreds of people. Back then, I was not interested in theater at all. In fact, I'd always thought that I would be interested in biology. And then, you might write your essay where you tell the story of transitioning from someone who thought they were interested in biology to kind of finding your passion or your real focus in theater. And then you take us through time to how that shift happened. And then by the end of the essay, we're back to kind of where we started, where the reader now understands how you personally came to find yourself as part of that scene that you started with. So that's the strategy that I advocate for writing a successful personal statement. And then, in terms of, line by line edits and stuff, that's something that that I really, it's hard to explain in a general way, what I think a strategy is for writing successful sentences that communicate clearly. But another thing that obviously we do in these sessions is to go through each paragraph and make sure that each sentence is communicating clearly, and also looking at the transitions between paragraphs to make sure it's clear, what's the logical relationship between paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 and 4, and make sure everything is tied together well. So where did we land on the issue of translation? I know that there's been a chat going on about the translating, Janet, and so I'm not sure. I just haven't been following every message, so I'm not sure whether I should be waiting for you to translate this or just going on to answer the next question.
I think you can go to the next question, Michael. Like you already talked about it. For the group session, there'll be 10 hours Zoom meeting. What will each session cover?
Yeah, I think I've maybe touched on that just in broad strokes, that the first 2 days are really brainstorming heavy. So day 1 is, but I'll get into it more specifically. That way people can get a more specific idea of what would happen over the course of those 5 days. So day 1 would be brainstorming as a group. I actually find that group brainstorming works really well for these sessions. I mean, just pinging ideas off each other is great. I have a lot of experience doing this, but that doesn't mean that none of the students in the session have valid thoughts or promising thoughts for what their peer might incorporate into their essay. So it can actually help to get more minds in the room to brainstorm what people might want to write about. But I also think it's really effective because let's say I start with one student and I say, okay, you're going to be the brave student who first has to tell me your thoughts about what you're thinking you might want to write about. It might be that student is thinking they might want to write about something, and I actually don't think it's a great idea. And I tell them why, right? I say, I don't think that's a great idea because this. It might be that, the 4 other students or the 3 other students or however many other students are in the group session, it might be that they were kind of thinking of writing something similar to that first person, but now that they hear my feedback on that idea, they realize that their idea probably isn't viable. And so then they can start brainstorming new ideas, right? And so it's true that my feedback to any one student will help all of the other students listening. And so in those brainstorming sessions, by the end of day 1, I want each student to have maybe 2 to 3 different ideas that they're mulling over for what they might want to write about. They're going to go home, they're going to reflect on those ideas that they might want to write about. They're going to consider the strengths of those ideas, what might be challenging about trying to execute those ideas. And they're going to come back the next day and we're going to share some of our thoughts in the session. And each student is going to ultimately, by day 2, settle on one idea that they're going to move forward with. Then we're going to outline for each of those papers. We're going to make an outline. Okay, how are you going to execute your idea? And so that outline will be a 5-paragraph essay. And the students will then try to write the first paragraph for day 3. We'll come in on day 3, we'll workshop the first paragraphs. That way I can see, especially for those first paragraphs where I'm requesting that students write in scene, a lot of students won't end up writing in scene. It's very easy, for example, let's say a student wants to make clear that they changed from someone who is shy to somebody who's outspoken. If you're writing in scene and you're writing a scene where you were still shy, you should not telegraph that you will then become someone who's outspoken. You should just write the scene from the perspective of your shy former self. But students often, will want to jump forward and share details from the future. And so I have to say, no, just be patient. We'll get those details in later. So especially for that first paragraph, I want to see how students are executing those and make sure they're doing it, I think, most effectively. So we'll go over those on day 3. They'll then be tasked with writing paragraphs 2 and 3. They'll write those. We'll go over those very closely, again, sort of line by line. They'll write paragraphs 4 and 5, and they'll write the final paragraph. And so, each of those sessions covers at most 2 paragraphs at a time. And we do a lot of close reading as a group. And I do think it's beneficial for students to hear my feedback on their peers' work. If they're paying attention to that feedback, they will inevitably pick up something that will apply to their own writing. So in the past, I really think these group sessions are excellent, an excellent format for writing this personal statement.
So Michael, do you have anything else you want to cover for Common personal statement before I do the translation? And maybe we'll just move on to supplemental essays.
Sure. I did see one question that I thought was a great question. Someone said, if I do have a genuine challenge in life, can I talk about it in the personal statement? And the answer to that is, of course. But the big but is that the emphasis should not be just on the fact that you had a challenge and you overcame it, right? Because everyone has had challenges. And there's really no use in trying to compare like the significance of your challenge to the significance of someone else's. What is interesting is if the challenge has really made you into who you are today, or if the challenge has really shaped your intellectual interests, especially, and your personality. So, especially in these personal statements where, again, it's a personal statement, but it's also a personal statement for college where you're going to be pursuing a particular line of academic study. So it's also good for these personal statements while talking about who you are, they should also sort of be about who you are as a student. So it should be a challenge that maybe helped you find your academic passion or your intellectual passion. Or the thing you want to study at college. It doesn't necessarily have to be intellectual. If it's performing arts or painting or something like that, that's fine too. But you do ultimately want to find a way to connect your like personal life to your academic life, and so that's fine. And then actually, this is a great question too, because I've had this question in the past. In fact, just last year in the group sessions for the personal statements, I had a student who insisted, I have no real interests. I don't find, this student was actually really funny. I liked him a lot, and I think he wrote one of the best personal statements I've ever read. But going into the sessions, he was sort of laconic and was like, I don't really have any interest. I don't like school very much. I was like, well, what's your favorite subject? He said, I don't have any. I don't really like any subjects. And so, then at that point, I have to kind of be more specific with my questions. Like, okay, well, what's one lesson from school that you liked? Or think of one day where something was interesting to you. Just pick something, anything that was interesting that happened, like at school or outside of school. Just what was one thing where, like, if I told you, okay, you've got the next 4 years of your life to do this thing, what are you doing? Because ultimately, you might have actually, in truth, no idea as a student what you want to do in college. And that is completely fine. But for the sake of the personal essay, you need to present yourself as somebody who has some kind of specific interest. And I find that that's just the most effective thing to do. It's hard to write an essay where you say, I don't have any academic interests, because then why are you applying to college? So I think, if you don't have a challenge, that's fine. Again, like I said, the essay doesn't need to be about a challenge. And so, you can just write about anything that you feel made you into who you are. And that could be experiences with your family. It could be, really anything. It could be, I'm trying to think of like the most non-academic essays that I've worked on in the past from people. Some students have talked about joining a club at school, even and their participation in the club and how they started off as like a young member of the club looking up to somebody else in it, and then that person sort of became their role model, and they realized that they wanted to change and become more like that person. So the role model essay is totally a valid type of personal essay where you discuss someone who is a role model, and you talk about how you have tried to develop as a person into someone who's more like that other person that you idolized. Yeah, and it can totally be about character development and personal identity, but I think that there should be some blending. There should be a blending of character development and personal identity with your intellectual interests. And often those two things are related, right? Like for example, I was really interested, I'm a creative writer now, and even going into college, I was interested in English. And I think it would be hard for me to really explain who I am without talking about my literary interests. And especially if I'm applying to college, why not advertise that part of my personality? Of course, there's other parts of my personality. I happen to love playing video games, but that's not the aspect of my personality I'm going to emphasize in an application to colleges, right? I'm going to emphasize the part of my identity that's more intellectual. I'm going to talk about my literary interests. So that's what I would say, is that it should be about character development. It should be about your values, and your values should come into your academic interests, even if you're in a subject that's not the humanities, where values are on discussion every day, right? Even if you're in a STEM field, every field has its ethics. And so, you should always talk about your values. If you want to be in this field, why do you want to be in it? One answer, right, always is like money and prestige and social status. And those are realities, and they're not wrong. No one thinks it's bad to pursue those things. But in a college application, you want to talk about different things. You don't want to say, well, I want to be a doctor because you make a lot of money. Well, why else do you want to be a doctor, right? What inspires you to want to be a doctor? Obviously the most cliche thing is like, I want to help people or make the world a better place. But can we be more specific than that? Like, what is it really about being a doctor that appeals to you? How did you personally get the ambition to be a doctor, for example, right? Because every generic person, right, could say, I want to be a doctor because doctors make a lot of money and they're respected. But the personal statement is a chance for you to distinguish yourself from other people. So maybe you say, well, when I was in 5th grade, I was having health issues, or my mother was having health issues, and we went to a doctor, and I still remember Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. And that person really set us at ease and made a big difference on our lives, right? In our lives. And I wanted to help other people in that same way. If you can mention that specific person from your life, right, and talk about what a big impact that person made on you, then that really differentiates you from other people, right? It's a specific story about specific experiences you've had. Yeah, so that's kind of how I would address this idea of like personal identity and character and values and intellectual interest. They should be blended in some way. Okay. Yeah.
OK，所以我做一下简短的翻译哈。一篇优秀的作文反映学生的成长的里程，而且呢，要突出学生的个人的性格、成长价值观。最重要、最重要的一点，要折射学生的兴趣。有的家长问：那我的学生在高中期间有挑战，我超越挑战了，这个文章怎么写？所有的学生都有自己不同的挑战。如果挑战造就了学生现在的自己，那么就要可以写挑战。如果学生没有挑战的话，那么还有很多其他的方式来帮着学生辅导作文。Mike 老师的 brainstorming 的 session 特别的高质量，因为他有自己设计出来的一系列的问题来挖掘学生的亮点。比如说，像去年的集训班，有个同学说我没有任何的挑战，我不知道该怎么写。那 Michael 老师可能就会问他一些问题，就是你有没有什么特点呢？大家都以善意的方式来笑你。那么这个学生呢，就想有这样一点，所以他就从一个比如说感官呐、听说读写啊，或者是他听到什么别人说什么这种对话呀，然后引发了一篇 Michael 老师觉得写的是一篇最优秀的文章之一。大家看一下，在 personal statement 方面还有没有其他的问题？在 personal statement 方面呢，我认为这个 brainstorming 是非常重要的一部分，因为语法的修改，所有的人都可以语法的修改，关键是你怎么样把学生这个亮点，把这个内容题材挖掘出来。那么现在呢，让大家看一下，有位同学对 Michael 老师的作文的反馈。这位同学的反馈呢是非常真实的。这位同学是早申被宾大录取。这位学生就提到，Michael 老师的作文的修改不仅仅是局限在语法呀，他呢是从宏观上掌控作文的内容，在这个基础上呢，然后在文章的结构啊、语言的简洁性啊、力度方面呢、立意方面呢进行提升。有位家长问：暑假有没有 Scholastic Essay Contest？ 暑假有没有Scholastic 作文竞赛？有的。Michael 老师暑假提供几期的 Scholastic 作文竞赛，比较适合秋季升10年级和11年级的同学。然后呢，这个奖项呢有最低级的这个奖项就是 Honorable Mention， 然后呢一步一步提升，接下来就是Silver Key 银钥匙奖、金钥匙奖，然后全国的提名。很多同学他是每一年都会参加的，因为可以逐年的晋级，而且这个奖项在大学申请表上有5个学术奖项的部分，可以填在大学申请表学术奖项的部分，非常值得参与的一个竞赛。Okay, Michael, you can talk about this question. Can you talk about what schools? Let me see. Okay. Can you address this question, Michael? 就是你辅导的学生都这个进入了哪些大学？Michael, can you talk about this question?
Which one?
This one. Can you see my screen?
Let me. Yes. I think I see your screen, but I just see the same questions.
Okay, so this one is like, can you talk about what schools other than UPenn you helped with students to get into, like Stanford, Harvard? You can talk about the schools the parents want to know the list of colleges.
Yeah, at this point, almost, I know it sounds arrogant, but at this point, almost any school you can think of, I've helped somebody get in there. So Harvard, Yale, Brown, Dartmouth, Cornell, Stanford, of course, the various UCal schools, University of Michigan, Tulane, a lot of smaller like NESCAC schools in the Northeast, like Williams or Amherst, Tufts. I really think at this point, I've worked with someone who's gotten into every Ivy League school. I'm trying to think of other, U Chicago. I've helped people applying to performing arts programs at NYU. Yeah, so pretty much everywhere at this point, which is it's surprising because this was not, I had never envisioned myself even really doing this work and really just stumbled into it about 6 years ago when I was looking for remote work to do when I traveled to Cape Verde. But at this point, over the course of 6 years working with various college counselors and companies in Palo Alto and New York, in Brooklyn and Palo Alto, especially. Yeah, I've helped people applying to West Coast schools, East Coast schools, and everywhere in between, really. You know, I think a lot of students I've worked with have been applying to University of Michigan as a, for some people as a backup school, for some people who are interested in business. I know University of Michigan has a really strong business program. U Chicago, again, is also a really academically rigorous school. And I myself went to Stanford, and so I think it's natural that a lot of people who are targeting Stanford want my advice on their essays. So I've seen, countless Stanford supplemental essays, the roommate question, of course, a million times. Yeah, so those are some of the schools that I've helped people apply to.
刚才学生家长的问题是 Michael 老师辅导过哪些大学的作文？他辅导大学申请作文辅导了6年，基本上美国所有的名校的这个大学作文，他都成功辅导学生曾经申请过，包含比如说芝加哥大学呀、斯坦福大学呀、藤校啊，也包含很多 NASCAP， 也就是美国新英格兰的那些文理学院，比如说 Williams 啊、Amherst 啊等等。So Michael, can you answer the next question?
Sure. I only see like barcodes on your screen right now.
Okay. So the next question is, hold on one sec. What if a student finds writing very challenging? How do you help with those students?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I've worked with a lot of students who find writing challenging, and personally, that makes a lot of sense to me. I find writing challenging, so I really sympathize with those students who find writing challenging. I think it is challenging, and I think first of all, outlining, I think, is really helpful for students who find writing challenging. And breaking it up, just the way I try to structure everything is designed to make the execution of the essay as manageable as possible. So like I said, a student is never asked to write more than 2 paragraphs in a night. And even that, I consider that a heavy workload. So I take seriously, like, all right, you've got 2 paragraphs to write tonight, and we're going to pay really close attention to that tomorrow. So there's the outlining, right? I give students very specific instructions for what they need to do. And I also go past just the outlining on the page. I don't just write, okay, so write this intro about a time in your lab when something blew up. I say, okay, you're gonna write this thing about a time in your lab when something blew up. But we'll do even more specific brainstorming in the session. I'll say, okay, what are specific sensory details that you remember about that incident? So was there a smell in the room? Do you remember what you were paying attention to? Do you remember the expression on one of your friends' faces? Like, what stood out to you? What did you perceive in that moment? And so we'll collect some details, and I'll say, okay, that's a great detail. I want to see that get into the paragraph somewhere. And so we'll do brainstorming like that, where I'll send the person home not just with an outline, but with notes, right, on specific details that I think that they could incorporate into this paragraph to make it the most vivid. Same with, paragraphs after that first paragraph. I'll say, okay, well, you're going to talk about your development from somebody who is more shy to somebody who was more outspoken. Well, what are some experiences you can remember where that change occurred? In the past, I remember someone wrote an essay where they spoke about having lunch with somebody, and during that conversation, they realized they really hated something somebody said, and they didn't say anything about it, and they wish they had. And so I'll say, like, okay, well, what did the person say? Like, can you remember? And can you remember what you felt in that moment? Like, what was the feeling of frustration like when you were sitting there silently and not saying anything? And did you berate yourself afterward? Were you upset with yourself for not saying anything? So I ask really targeted questions of the students to try to figure out what were their perceptions, what are their feelings, things like that. And also, what are their values, since that was something somebody mentioned earlier. And I think that word values is really important to this essay too. So, I'll ask really targeted questions where I'm not just sending students off and saying, now write 2 paragraphs and we'll see what you came up with tomorrow, right? I'm sending them off with specific questions to think about. So I think that does make it easier. And then when we come in and we pay we pay such close attention to the lines, and we go through, and I'm asking students kind of like line by line, like, all right, so what did you want to say here? Or what were you trying to say here? Can you just try to, explain it to me in your own words? And then we can take those words that it might be easier to say and then work on translating those onto the page.
OK， 刚才有个家长的问题是，我的孩子不擅长写作，那么这种情况怎么处理？其实去年就有一位同学是这样，就是特别惧怕写作。然后 Michael 老师呢就说，哎，那你的这个同学都笑话你的哪一点？非常善意的笑话。那这个同学说，那实验室你听到了什么？实验室你看到了什么？实验室大家的反应是什么？所以 Michael 老师在 brainstorming 的时候，他自己设计的一系列的问题，真的是能够深度挖掘学生的亮点。最后这个学生写的文章特别的精彩，学生的反馈是 Michael 老师太牛了，我一直惧怕写作，他是第一位老师让我觉得写作是这么有趣。好，接下来还有很多家长问这个 Scholastics 的作文竞赛。所以我们要稍微谈一下 Scholastic 作文竞赛。暑假 Scholastic 作文竞赛呢，主要是针对3类作文：Flash Fiction、Personal Essay and Memoir, Critical Essay. Some parents want to know more about Scholastic essay competition, so should we spend like 5 minutes to talk about it right now?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine.
Yeah, so how do you I mean, your summer camp cover those 3 types of genres. So can you talk about what would each Zoom session cover?
Sure. Okay, so I'll start with the critical essay. So for the critical essay, the process will be a little bit different than it would be for the personal essay / memoir or for flash fiction. The big thing with a critical essay that's different is that you need an argument, right, or a thesis. And that's specifically what I said you do not need, right, in the personal essay. The personal essay should not be argumentative. The critical essay should be argumentative. So one of the big things that we're trying to accomplish in workshops on the critical essay is that we want to work toward an argument, a specific thesis statement that lays out something that can be proven over the course of the essay. And so in the critical essay, one of the big parts of my process is that I'm going to ask students in the early sessions to basically scour the text or the film or the poem, right, or the song in question, whatever they're writing their critical essay about. They're going to scour it for evidence of what they might want to claim. And we're going to make notes about that evidence. We're going to look at that evidence, and we're going to try to figure out what argument it supports. And then from that point on, once we've got in place the points of evidence that we want to use and the thesis statement that we want to make, from there, the process it looks more similar to, you know, a personal essay where we would then outline paragraph by paragraph for a 5-paragraph essay and execute that outline paragraph by paragraph. Where instead of it being an essay like a personal essay where there's a shift in the person, right, there would be a shift in the argument. So I would want to see that argument develop. The one phrase that I use a lot is, okay, how do we push this further? How do we push this argument further? So even in the classes that I taught at Florida State, I taught composition classes there where I would teach critical essays. And one of the biggest flaws with critical essays is that they stagnate. So basically, the writer has one good point, and they make that one good point over and over for the course of the whole essay. And that one good point is really good, but it's not big enough to sustain a whole essay. So one of the really crucial things in a critical essay is figuring out how to make sure that each paragraph builds on the next one and complicates the argument. And so if you come up with a sufficiently complicated thesis that allows for room for the essay to develop, it's easier for you to execute a complicated essay that continues to be dynamic and that continues to develop. So that's what we really aim at for critical essays. For the personal essay and memoir, that's very similar, a similar process to writing a personal statement. Although that personal essay, you know, it might, as people were noticing, it might not have anything to do with your academic interests. So in terms of structure or how the workshop would be run, it would be similar to the personal statement, but there just wouldn't be, we wouldn't be quite so focused on making sure to touch on intellectual interests. And the personal essay might be more about somebody's relationship with one person in their life and exploring the meaning of that relationship or the feelings that were evoked by that relationship. It might be just, a personal essay might be just about processing one confusing or difficult moment in your life. So one thing I ask students all the time for personal essays is think of something that happened that you just still don't understand. So bad personal essays tend to be where students have an opinion. They're basically just opinion pieces where the student has an opinion on something and they just use the personal essay form as an excuse to talk about an opinion that they already had and justify it through personal experiences. Good ones tend to be where students don't actually know what they already think about something and they start from a place of confusion or lack of understanding, and the personal essay investigates it. And then flash fiction is the quirkiest, I would say, of the forms. Flash fiction, there's a lot of different leeway for the structure of a flash fiction piece. It could focus on just a very brief moment in a person's life. It could focus on some thoughts that a person had, you know, at a particular moment. It can be a description of something. I've seen flash fiction pieces that are almost like ekphrastic, if people know what that is, where like you're writing on a work of art almost, and you're just like describing the work of art, but like taking some imaginative leaps while you do it. So flash fiction is certainly the most imaginative of the art forms here. So those pieces, there's just a lot more leeway with what the person writes about or how they want to execute that piece. So flash fiction, there's not one definite process. It's more, we play to the student's strengths. So if this is a student who wants to experiment with language, then the flash fiction piece can really be a playful opportunity to experiment with language. If the student has one kind of, maybe it's inspired by a personal experience, but it's like a moment in time that they just want to talk about and tell a quick story. That might be a good opportunity or a good place for flash fiction.
刚才麦克老师谈论了 Scholastic 作文竞赛3种不同的文体，集训班呢只是针对这3种文体，然后参与学生的最低年龄是13岁。这个暑假的集训班呢是针对秋季是10年级或11年级的同学，但是秋季是8年级的同学和9年级的同学当然也可以参加。像有的同学他比如说去年参加了诗歌竞赛啊等等。
Yeah.
有位家长想让再分享一下 Common App 主作文的 时间表。So those are the Common App personal statement summer camp schedule. Zoom 会议是10个小时，5天完成，每天2个小时，按照刚才麦克老师的行程而定。5天之后，学生都有一个内容非常准确反映学生特点的作文。之后，麦克老师精改2次。我看麦克老师之前修改的文章，在立意方面对学生的作文做了大幅度的提高。然后有的学生可能是没有把想说的话有力度的说出来，这个方面也做了很大的提高。所以 Michael 老师的修改远远超出了最基本的语法修改。关于 Common App 这个班的人数，小班的人数是3到4人。关于 Scholastic 作文竞赛，人数限定在3人。Michael, can you see this question?
From VC?
From like, what are structures of Common App essay you have used or recommend? That's the question from one of the parents.
Okay. Yeah, let me answer that. And then let me answer VC's question too, because I really love that question. And I think it will help me to explain how to write successful Common App personal statements and supplemental essays. So, okay, so what are structures of Common App essay you've used or recommend? Well, I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, but basically I almost always advocate for a 5-paragraph structure. I don't know why. You know, the 5-paragraph essay, everybody hates it. They have to write it in high school and everybody hates it. But I find that it actually turns out to be a good structure for these personal statements. I think it allows for a sufficient amount of development in the short amount of space that 650 words gives you. So usually about 5 paragraphs is the right number of paragraphs. And as I said before, paragraph 1 is kind of an in-scene moment. Paragraph 2 zooms out and goes probably back in time usually. Paragraph 3, there's a turn or a development from paragraph 2 to paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 takes us to where the student currently is. And then paragraph 5 is a place for reflection and for stating the student's goals moving forward. So that's basically the structure that I use for the personal statements. And then just quickly to take VC's question too, just because I think it helps me to explain how to write these things successfully. I just think that anxiety is so common. How to still stand out, right? These specific questions must have been answered in every possible way. How to still stand out, right? That's a great question. And yes, they have been answered in every possible way, but your way of answering the question will always stand out if you write about your personal experiences. So I say this to people all the time, like, your personal experiences are not exceptional only if they're extraordinary and dramatic. Like, you don't have to be you don't have to have like invented a new type of roller coaster and be like the first person with a rare genetic disorder to stand out, because the circumstances of your particular life, as cliche as it is, right, they are unique. So the more specific you can be in talking about your experiences and your interests, the better. That advice, I think, is more relevant to personal statements. For supplemental essays, often the answer is actually to just really try to get over that anxiety about trying to stand out, because a lot of where I see people go wrong is they think that what their task is in supplemental essays is to write sort of a performative essay where like they try to be goofy or they try to be really risky and bold with their writing. That is not at all what I advise people to do in supplemental essays. Instead, do your research on the schools, find professors that you might want to work with, find classes that you might want to take, and clubs you might want to participate in. Show that you know what you'd be getting into if you went to that school, really specifically. Like, what classes you want to take. Also, show how those classes build on your current interests. So if you're like, I loved the section in my, you might even say like, I wasn't a huge fan of my junior year psych class, but I loved the section on, child psychology. And as, someone who's an older cousin and has 15 younger cousins, I guess I've always been interested in child psychology. And I noticed that at Fordham, I could take this, baby talk class with Dr. Whoever it is, whose lab studies whatever. I think I was just researching there's some lab, I think it's at Fordham, called Baby Talk. But that's the kind of specificity you would want to write with in those supplemental essays. And that will make you stand out because no one else is going to choose those exact same classes that you choose with those exact same professors. No one else is going to have the exact same experiences you had in high school. And so you're telling a story of like your own life up to this point and how you envision a specific college experience building on the current interests and experiences you've had.
I think Michael may have to leave in about 5 minutes. So we probably could use the last 5 minutes to give an overview of Stanford supplemental essays.
Yeah, of course.
所以Michael 老师还有5分钟要离开，我们最大限度的利用这5分钟，那我们讲一下斯坦福的辅助作文，著名的8篇辅助作文，让 Michael 老师给我们一些 advice. Okay, go ahead. Maybe you can talk about the Stanford supplemental essays. What are your advices or strategies for writing the top-notch supplemental essays?
Yeah, sure. So my big piece of advice that I always share for the Stanford essays is there are about 8 of them. And so you want to coordinate your answers for those 8 questions in order to show the school what you're really interested in. So, one question might say something like, if you could have been present for one historical event, what would it be? And another might be like, I don't actually remember if this is specifically a Stanford question, but it might be like, if you could bring one person to campus to like talk, who would you bring? And so like if you answered, I wish I could have been present. I think I said when I was applying, I was a classics student. And I think I said like, I wish I could have been present for like the stabbing of Julius Caesar in the Roman Senate. Because I just would have wanted to see like how people reacted to the betrayal. And so let's say then there was a question about, who would I want to bring to campus to talk or something? I would say a classics scholar, just to connect those 2 answers and demonstrate to the school, I am a classics person, right? So like, again, the idea is to like curate a kind of image of yourself as someone who's interested in a specific thing. And again, you can go too far with that, where like literally every answer to those 8 questions should not be classics, 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 classics. But you should coordinate in some way so that the school gets an idea of who you are advertising yourself to be to them. As for the famous roommate essay, the biggest mistake there is trying to be too silly. It is a more informal essay for sure. They want it to be more informal. You should not write it like it's a letter to your parents or to the admissions office. It is a letter to your roommate. That is the genre. It's a challenge, right? They are asking you to understand how to write in different genres. So it's a compositional challenge to you, but that is not permission to just be silly. So don't write about irrelevant things, right? You still want in that essay to demonstrate to the school what you're really interested in. So I find a really successful strategy for that roommate essay is to discuss some idea or hobby you have been obsessed with lately. Like, I'd say if it was me right now, like I might say, I've really been obsessed with Elena Ferrante's novels recently. And I might, act like my roommate doesn't know who Elena Ferrante is or something. I might say, have you heard of Elena Ferrante? She's this amazing Italian author. She writes under a pseudonym, so nobody actually knows who she is. People have tried to find out. Personally, I hope that her privacy is respected. You know, I don't want her to be found out. But I think it's really cool that people have been making pilgrimages to this island where one of her characters went. And I'd love to maybe go there some summer if you're up for an adventure. You know, so you might write something like that where you share something you've been interested in lately and you try to include your roommate in it. You say, you know, I've been really into this lately. I'd love for you to do it with me, or I'd love for us to do this together. That's the kind of essay that I think tends to be successful. Yeah, Janet, sorry, Janet, you're muted.
所以今天我们其实还有很多可以讲的，但是因为时间的关系，没有时间再触及一个所有的大学都有一个类似的作文，就是 Why us？ 为什么选我们大学？为什么选这个学院，或为什么选这个专业？不过今天的webinar 已经讲了很多的内容，从 Common App 大作文如何撰写，到 Scholastic 作文竞赛，到一些 Stanford 的辅助作文，所以今天的内容量是非常非常的丰富。然后 Mike 老师他是在中部，所以他现在已经是晚上11:09了，所以他可能就要sign off。然后接下来呢，我们再和大家如果有问题的话，再讲一些 logistics 方面的问题。So Michael, it's probably pretty late for you in the East Coast, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit late.
Yeah. So it's a great session, and I hope your move tomorrow will be smooth.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sitting on a stool right now because I've packed up all of my belongings to move to Atlanta tomorrow. So,
Wow.
but yeah, but anyway, great questions to everybody in the chat. Sorry we don't have even more time. I always, you know, enjoy talking with people about this stuff. Yeah, again, if people have any other questions, you know, feel free to ask, you know, ask Janet, and we can always do another session if there's, you know, additional information on, I guess, the supplemental essays, especially that people want to know. We could always do another session on that or something. So.
Yeah, supplemental essays for those top universities are as important as the Common App personal statement.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michael. Good night.
Okay,